November 10, 1997 Wrestling Observer Newsletter, Bret Hart gives notice, Brian Pillman's official cause of death by Observer staff. NJPW Fukuoka Dome results, Tijuana and ECW riots, and much more. November 10, 1997. Bret Hart gave notice over the weekend that he was leaving the World Wrestling Federation and his 20-year contract and officially agreed to terms for a 2-year deal with World Championship Wrestling. The 40-year-old Hart, who had along with The Undertaker been the face of the WWF promotion after the end of the Hulk Hogan era, had reportedly been more and more unhappy with the new cruder direction of the WWF and that, far more than money, played a part in his decision according to some close to the situation. Others have categorized it as simply a money deal and that any other explanation as to the main reason would be misleading. Both Hart and the World Wrestling Federation were attempting to keep the story under lids, so to speak, until after the Survivor Series pay-per-view show in Montreal on November 9th, at which time Hart would have likely given an interview at the taping the next night in Ottawa, or an announcement would have been made by the WWF on that show or at least teased for hotline fodder. On the same night, on the Nitro from Memphis, Eric Bischoff would have also made an announcement about Hart coming to WCW. After the story got out on November 4th, the WWF did release a statement saying they were giving Hart the opportunity to explore other options. On the November 3rd Nitro, Bischoff teased a big surprise on next week's show, which was to be the announcement of Hart coming to the NWO, although no doubt the NWO aspect would be a swerve similar to the introductions of people like Kurt Hennig and Jeff Jarrett. The plan at press time was for Hart to continue with the WWF, working all his scheduled house shows through the end of November, and then return for one final show on the December 7th pay-per-view show from Springfield, Massachusetts, and he would start with WCW shortly thereafter. However, all plans could change since the story got out everywhere on November 3rd. Negotiations between Hart and Eric Bischoff went back about 6 weeks, known to only a few people, almost all of whom were sworn to secrecy. The two met 3 weeks ago in Los Angeles, at which time WCW officials seemed about 80% sure Hart was going to make the move, but Hart didn't make his final decision until the weekend. The top WWF officials were aware of the negotiations at least over the past 2 weeks, if not longer, as those aware of the story as it was breaking could see in the past 2 weeks certain phrases said on television that wouldn't have been said had they not been aware, although the finality of his leaving the company wasn't known until the weekend. As mentioned in last week's Observer, Hart had a clause in his contract that would have allowed him to get out of his contract with the WWF if he was unhappy by giving the company just a 30-day notice. Hart negotiated both that clause and another clause giving him creative control of his character during those final 30 days last year in negotiations that literally went right down to the wire as Hart was deciding between huge offers from both WWF and WCW. At that point he decided on the WWF offer more because of how he always felt the story of his career that he wanted to write was going to end with him riding off in the sunset as a hero in the WWF. Something Hulk Hogan never did, legitimately out of loyalty to the company that made him a celebrity in the WWF fans, and also to avoid what he felt were potential pitfalls of going to a company where longtime rival Hulk Hogan was the biggest star. His story had to be amended to a story where he left the company that made him famous because he could no longer put up with the direction of the racial angles and antics of his most hated rival and the company's pick to replace him as champion, Shawn Michaels, that had made him so embarrassed as to no longer allow his children to watch the WWF television. Hart agreed to his 20-year deal with the WWF on October 21, 1996, with the plan at the time, which didn't quite materialize as promised, that he would be getting the title long-term, beating Michaels at WrestleMania. As the story played out, Michaels didn't last until WrestleMania as champion, or until WrestleMania where he was to put Hart over. Exact contract terms weren't known, but it is known that Hart was earning well over $1 million per year guaranteed on his Titan deal, and the total worth of the contract between guaranteed money and other considerations over time was probably in the $10 million range. Hart chose the deal over a WCW contract that offered him a $2.8 million guaranteed figure over 3 years, figures that were $800,000 in wrestling income and another $2 million guaranteed for starring roles in 2 movies per year over the terms of the contract, at a time when Hart was contemplating easing out of wrestling and into being a full-time actor. The structure also allowed the huge wrestling contract to be picked up on the Turner Movie Studio books, making the wrestling company appear to be more profitable at a time when corporate restructuring with the Time Warner purchase was going on. That figure that didn't include potential merchandising revenue and bonuses for pay-per-view appearances, so it would in all likelihood also have been worth well in excess of $9 million. All that is known about the WCW deal he agreed to is that it is similar to the original deal Bischoff offered last year, although the money has scaled down because Hart insisted on working fewer dates, believed to be in the 125 to 140 range, than in the original deal because of his injuries, in particular his knee that has never fully recovered from an injury earlier in the year and a chronic bad wrist from numerous breaks and no time off to allow for proper healing. There may be modifications or changes in the movie role aspect of the deal as well. In addition, the contract is for 2 years rather than 3, with an option for a third year. When Hart arrives, he'll immediately be inserted into the top of the mix within the promotion and used to get the new Thursday Night Live show on TBS over, as well as help the company's presence in Canada, where he is the country's most popular wrestler. Nitro just began airing weekly on TSN in Canada, and TBS just became a regular as opposed to a premium cable station throughout the country, giving WCW tremendously improved exposure in a country they've never really done a lot of business historically in. Even before Hart's signing, the company was making plans to run shows more frequently and market its product stronger in Canada in 1998. Although Hart would also help internationally, particularly in Europe, WCW doesn't appear to have any interest in cultivating that market after a series of largely unsuccessful tours in that part of the world over the years. Hart, in one of the most memorable live pro wrestling interviews of all time, announced literally hours after making up his decision, live in Fort Wayne, Indiana on Raw, his acceptance of the WWF offer while Vince McMahon feigned concern over a decision that he actually already knew. However, it didn't take long before Hart started getting disgruntled with the new direction of the WWF. After a few months, Hart devised his own angle, starting with a double turn in his WrestleMania match with Steve Austin, which would result in he, along with brother Owen and brother-in-law Davey Boy Smith, being the top babyface internationally, particularly in Canada, but as strong anti-American heels in the United States. During the summer, particularly in the wake of the WWF pay-per-view show in Calgary, which was the single most well-received pay-per-view show in company history, the angle appeared to be red hot. It had cooled and the focus of the company had shifted from Hart as the top heel to his longtime rival, Shawn Michaels, who he had a legitimate dressing room fight with earlier in the year due to a Michaels television interview referring to Bret having sunny days which affected Bret's personal life, a line that he thought was unprofessional to cross. The problems between the two went back farther, dating back to Bret putting Michaels over at WrestleMania in 1996, and then deciding to sit out to watch Michaels flop with the spotlight on him. With Bret gone and Michaels on top, things both did and didn't go exactly as Hart had surmised. WWF house show business flourished. At the same time, with Michaels as the focal point, television ratings hit company all-time record lows. Although a tremendous performer in the ring, Michaels was seemingly on a path of self-destruction, as a perfectionist throwing unprofessional fits when the show didn't go exactly perfectly or if a few hecklers would get on his case. Michaels, claiming a career-ending knee injury, walked out on the promotion just before he was scheduled to have to put over Psycho Sid for the WWF title on a live USA Network special, and getting out of his scheduled match where he was going to have to put Bret over at WrestleMania to boot. Many within the company blamed WrestleMania's poor buy rate on the fact they had spent 1 year building up to one match, and then just a few weeks before the show, that match was pulled and they had to start building into a different direction. When it became apparent Michaels' knee injury, while legit, was nowhere near as serious as he intimated, he was scheduled to return. But before another scheduled match with Bret that he was supposed to lose on June 8, this time it was Bret whose knee gave out, and he underwent surgery. After some classic verbal battles on television, no match took place in the ring. With Bret still recovering from his knee surgery, he and Michaels had a backstage brawl on June 9 in Hartford, Connecticut, resulting in Bret aggravating his knee and keeping him out of action even longer, and Michaels, claiming knee and neck injuries, walked out on the company claiming an unsafe working environment, just weeks after he attempted and failed to get out of his own 5-year contract with the WWF so he could join WCW. Neither Hart, who by all accounts threw the first blow, nor Michaels, who taunted him into doing so by sarcastically responding to Bret's complaints by saying something along the lines of "So what are you going to do about it?" were punished for the fight, and instead officials seemed to beg Michaels to return, creating the sense of anarchy that has resulted in what some categorize as the beginning of the fall of a once great promotional power. Eventually the two agreed to peacefully coexist, agreeing to keep families and personal lives out of their interviews. Bret felt Michaels violated that when in a recent interview he brought up Bret's 83-year-old father Stu, claiming that he was walking around Calgary dead, only his brain and his body didn't know it yet, although Michaels did apologize afterwards, claiming that he simply got carried away performing for the crowd. Michaels' antics in recent weeks, which even though his television persona pretends otherwise, were obviously encouraged and allowed by Vince McMahon, turned Hart off worse because his vision of pro wrestling dating back to his childhood was of something that a father could watch with his kids and not have to turn off the television set in embarrassment. Perhaps the final blow was when Titan made the decision to go with Michaels as champion over Bret in the Survivor Series, a decision that asks even more questions. Of course, that decision could simply be the latest in the line of short-term business decisions by a company that seemingly changes its direction by reacting every other Monday. Michaels had become such an effective heel that he literally had turned his rival, the anti-American foreigner, almost into a babyface in the US. At the same time, there were thoughts within the company that the Hart contract was a 19-year debt that in hindsight many were questioning, with the feeling being McMahon made the decision out of wanting to win a momentary battle that he and others hyped into the immediate priority in a bitter wrestling war, and not necessarily a contract that made economic sense given the financial structure of the company. Certainly those in charge had to know how Hart would feel if asked to put Michaels over for the title, which leads to the speculation that all of these actions by both Michaels and Hart to an extent were actually an expert marionette pulling strings of his two strongest puppets. Michaels' track record of finding a way numerous times to not drop titles, besides walking out earlier this year instead of dropping the title to Sid, he also quit the WWF in 1993 rather than drop the Intercontinental title. He was injured and failed to drop the IC title in 1995, and earlier this year walked out on the company at a time he and Steve Austin held the tag team title, and the fact he's refused to work more than once a week made any decision giving him back the major title to be one somewhat perplexing. Even more so to his most hated rival, who valued the title belt to a degree that outsiders would find almost incredulous. Most of Michaels' juvenile television behavior that fans see were part of his new character orchestrated by McMahon, where he continually does things to try and get fired based on the idea that everyone knows that earlier this year that is exactly what he wanted to do. Still, as noted below, it clearly rubbed Hart the wrong way, particularly when he jumped up and down and showed his bare butt on television, which over the past week many have given as the reason for an incredible 26% turnoff ratio of the Raw audience after that segment aired on October 27. Although Raw's 2.63 rating on November 3 was right at its usual average. Michaels had already been put over British Bulldog for the European title in a match that was originally booked for Michaels to do a clean job in. Exactly what is going to happen in Montreal is unclear. With Hart leaving, everyone will expect him to lose to Michaels for logical common sense business reasons. With wrestling the way it is today, the title switch shouldn't be taken as a lock, although obviously he will be dropping the title at some point very quickly. WCW scored a second major coup with word that Bischoff and Ric Flair had basically agreed to terms this past week and that it was expected Flair would be signing a contract extension very shortly. Flair, whose contract expired in a few months, was someone WWF officials were highly interested in going after and who at least strongly considered the idea of such a move back. The next obvious question concerns the future of Owen Hart and Davey Boy Smith. The belief is that both, who signed 5-year contracts each over the past 14 months, will remain with similar roles as at present in the WWF, and the situation with Bret has nothing to do with their futures. Just a few days before Hart made his final decision to leave, he wrote a column in the Calgary Sun. Obviously much of the column was typical pro wrestling, attempting to hype his next big match in the new in vogue more realistic insider fashion, but in hindsight, you can see where his head was at in other ways just before making his decision. The column was written as a letter to Michaels. Shawn Michaels, you're a disgrace to professional wrestling. It amazes me that there was a time I actually thought you'd be the guy who could come up behind me and carry the ball when my time comes to retire. Now when you're behind me, I have to make sure I don't bend over. I am a second-generation wrestler. Like a lot of second-generation wrestler, I've paid my dues. The way you are degrading the business makes me sick and breaks my heart. That's not what Heartbreak Kid was supposed to mean. I told you, and Vince told you, to leave our families out of this. So you got on Raw and said that my father is dead. This time you're so far over the line that there's no coming back. Every so often after you shoot off your mouth, you come to me backstage with a lame apology and a limp handshake. Oh Bret, my mouth always gets me in trouble when I get going out there. You know I didn't mean nothing by it. Don't bother this time, I'm not buying it. I would not embarrass my father, who is not only very much alive but is still tougher today at 83 and more of a man than you will ever be, as you have embarrassed your father with your degenerate behavior. How humiliating for your poor father to have to explain your lewd gestures to her friends. You don't respect anybody, do you? What does Jose Lothario think of how you've made pornography out of what he taught you? Shawn Michaels, you are nothing more than a whore for this business. You called me a paper champion because it bothers you that my contract is worth more than you and the whole Degeneration X put together. You said I wrestle because I need the money, but you wrestle because this business needs you. You are a festering cancerous tumor in this business. After WrestleMania 12, I went home for a while to give you the chance to become the man, because as long as I'm around you'll never be the man. You were so bad at being the man that the WWF and WCW had the biggest bidding war in wrestling history to get me to come back. You'd have the World Championship belt. But you don't. What do you have, besides a big mouth and a bad attitude? Shawn Michaels, you said that beating The Undertaker makes you an icon. Not taking anything away from Taker, but you weren't the first guy to beat him, you just did it too late. You said you're the only icon that can still go, not like the fossils. You're so beat up from taking completely overdone bumps like a Mexican jumping bean that you can't even work a full schedule like the older guys. You only wrestle about once a month and you're proud of that. Then people who think they know more about this business than they actually do, write about what a hard worker you are. Anyone can work hard once a month. You've barebacked your way to main event matches and they give you the best guys in the business to make you look good. So you and your boyfriend, Hunter, think I'm told. Hunter said he's bigger than me in more ways than one, and then you pointed at Hunter's crotch and said he could put an eye out with that thing. Thanks for admitting that you know what Hunter has in his pants. So how come I have 4 kids and all you two have is each other? I'm not the one shooting blanks. By the way, you both looked very comfortable eating bananas together on Raw. Lots of parents tell me they won't let their kids watch the shows anymore because of you and they don't watch either because you're such an asshole. People are shutting the show off because of you. It took so long to make wrestling into family entertainment. Thanks for setting the business back 50 years. You're the one who is confusing expansion and destruction, not me. You, Shawn, are the destruction of this business. You make me sick. You said you're the best sports entertainer in the world. Don't even think about saying you're a wrestler. What I do is an art form and what you do is what do you do anyway, cause it's not pro wrestling anymore? You called the WWF World Championship a tin title but you're only saying that because you don't have the belt. When you did have it, you treated it like garbage and then threw it away. So now you want to try to win the title at Survivor Series. You better reconsider that because when I get my hands on you it's going to make the beating I gave you in the locker room last June look like a warm-up. After the little scuffle, you went running to Vince, complaining that the work conditions in the WWF are unsafe. The only thing unsafe about the working conditions in the WWF is you, Shawn. You've gotten in the ring so pilled up lately that you can't even talk straight on TV. You better shake the cobwebs free before you get in the ring with me at SS. This business has been my mistress for my whole life and I love her. You're raping her and taking her dignity away. Don't count on my reputation for professionalism saving your ass at SS. You're the one who threw the rule book out the window. The 17 stitches you got at Hell in the Cell are nothing compared to what's coming at Misery in Montreal. The official cause of death of Brian Pillman will apparently be listed as a heart attack due to natural causes. At press time, the Hennepin County Medical Examiner's Office had not released an official press statement on Pillman, but family sources said such a statement would be released later in the week. Pillman was found dead at the age of 35 in a Bloomington, Minnesota motel room at 1:09 p.m. on October 5, the night after wrestling his final match at the St. Paul Civic Center and just hours before the WWF was about to go on the air with a pay-per-view show. Reports from those close to the situation indicate that after nearly 1 month of tests, the coroners reported on November 3 that they were stumped for a cause of the heart attack, although his heart showed an unusual amount of damage for someone of his age. This could have been partially hereditary given his family history, and also due to the amount of stress he had placed on his heart. Either steroids and/or cocaine have been known to cause heart damage which over the years can have a cumulative effect. It was no secret Pillman had used steroids dating back to his college and pro football days, and through the early part of his wrestling career for obvious reasons, being that in all the aforementioned professions use was plentiful during the 80s and his own lack of natural body size was really the only thing holding him back from stardom. Toxicology reports did not reveal any intake of drugs that could have caused the death. The reports revealed the expected prescription painkillers, although not at dangerous levels. There were no traces of steroids or any other illegal drug found in his system. The steroid DCA Durabolin was the only illegal drug found in his system when he was drug tested by the WWF on August 28, although the low levels and the fact that drug can stay in the system and show up in tests longer after usage than any other steroid, in rare occasions for more than 1 year after its last usage, although usually it won't longer than a few months, was the reason he wasn't suspended for what could have technically been ruled a failed drug test. There wasn't even any trace of alcohol in his system. There was an empty beer bottle found in his room along with several bottles, none empty, of prescription pain pills, when the police opened the door. Later reports indicated that while the bottle of beer was empty, the cap was still on the bottle and this it had broken and the contents of the bottle apparently spilled onto his clothes so it appeared he had never even drank the beer. The only strange drug found in his system, a prescription drug that he apparently did not have a prescription for, was medication used to combat high blood pressure. This would not have been something he would have been taking medication for. Later reports have indicated that when he went on the road trip to Minneapolis for his first match of the weekend, he had run out of a certain painkiller and theoretically he had either asked for one from another wrestler or a hanger-on, and was given something that was actually not a painkiller. However, the amount in his system wasn't ruled dangerous, and that was also ruled out as being a potential cause of death. The toxicology report showing no traces of cocaine put tremendous heat on Gene Okerlund in WCW, who had claimed to have the inside scoop directly from the doctor that Pillman died of a cocaine overdose. On October 27, on a WCW Internet audio show with Mark Madden, Okerlund discussed this fact as his lead scoop. This naturally led to rumors running rampant, as the week went on, of that being the actual cause of death. Okerlund had all along privately claimed to have inside connections with the police and the doctors since Pillman's death occurred in the Twin Cities, where Okerlund lived for decades and regaled people with sordid tales, which apparently greatly differed at least from police reports of the scene at the motel room, and of what would be the final report from the coroner. Okerlund nor any other WCW personnel never discussed this information publicly anywhere except on the audio show and not on the hotline. The condition of longtime WWF icon Bob Morella, Gorilla Monsoon, had improved over the week, although as of press time he was still listed in serious condition at Allegheny University Hospital in Philadelphia. Morella was on a respirator and kidney dialysis much of the past week, and early in the week his condition was listed as grave after a heart attack on October 26. By the end of the week he was able to be removed from the respirator, and doctors were hoping to perform a much-needed heart bypass operation when his physical condition improved to where he was considered out of danger. Doctors had, prior to the heart attack, recommended to Morella that he undergo a heart transplant, but he was reluctant. He had more than 90% blockage in more than one ventricle. Morella, a former amateur wrestling star at Ithaca College, made his professional name first as a heel after being given one of the all-time classic ring names, has been part of both the old Worldwide Wrestling Federation and current World Wrestling Federation since the mid-60s, and a famous title run against then-champion Bruno Sammartino while managed by Wild Red Berry. He later turned babyface and was a long-time part owner of the old Capital Sports, parent company of both the WWF and early days of the WWF, before selling his stock to Vince McMahon Jr. in 1982. He had remained with the company ever since, both in his visible roles as a television announcer and later figurehead company president, and behind the scenes working the front office and giving the time cues at television tapings. New Japan's final Dome show of 1997 wound up on a flat note with an uneventful and largely disappointing show on November 2 at the Fukuoka Dome. The crowd was announced at 48,000, although those there live estimated the real figure as closer to 40,000 in the largest indoor stadium in Japan, with a capacity of just under 70,000, which would be the smallest dome show crowd ever for the promotion. Fukuoka has always been a tough sell even when the promotion was at its peak and the lineups were attractive, which is why there had always been debates after the show in the past about trying it the next year, and in fact, there was no show at the building in 1996 after doing annual events from its opening in 1993 through 1995. New Japan has been the most successful promotion not only in the world, but in fact, in the history of the industry over the past few years when it came to successfully running stadium shows, but this card was a reality check of what many had noticed over the past year about the long-term future of the company. New Japan has remained successful on big shows this year, particularly packing its January Tokyo Dome and subsequent debut shows this year at both the Osaka and Nagoya Domes. After a second Tokyo Dome was somewhat of a disappointment, although that was easily explained because the show was only booked after the agreement the company had made with Ken Shamrock, and his match with Shinya Hashimoto would have been an easy draw. When Shamrock signed with the WWF, leaving New Japan with a dome booked and no main event to fill it, the replacement, Naoya Ogawa, didn't have the box office juice to wrestling fans, even though he was a well-known mainstream name from his days as a national hero from judo. In recent months, New Japan has done big business with the countdown to the end of the career of one of the country's all-time wrestling legends, Riki Choshu. However, that countdown has one big show left, and after that there doesn't appear to be anything on the horizon for New Japan in 1998, as the lesson of this card showed. From a Japanese fan standpoint, this card only had one ticket-selling match, the Choshu vs. Kensuke Sasaki teacher vs. pupil match. Given that it would be their last ever meeting, that Sasaki was the current IWGP Heavyweight Champion after being given one of the biggest pushes in company history, that doesn't appear to have totally worked, and that Sasaki has never beaten Choshu in a singles match. So as to put the result of the match in question, the match was made non-title, figuring that usually when the champion is in a high-profile non-title match, it's usually an angle for him to lose to build up a title match. From a show standpoint, reports are it was largely a series of uneventful so-so matches, with the exception of the one match you'd figure would be great, Shinjiro Otani's retaining of the J Crown against Wild Pegasus, Chris Benoit. There were no real angles coming out of the show other than the continuing build for a Don Fry vs. Ogawa match, which is likely for January 4 at the Tokyo Dome, and a post-match angle at the party where legendary Holland Karate champion Gerard Gordeau, who has done jobs in worked matches in the past to the likes of Akira Maeda and Antonio Inoki, and was the finalist in the very first UFC losing to Royce Gracie, challenged Hashimoto to a match at the Dome. We don't have any gate figures at press time but do know merchandise sales, particularly Choshu merchandise, which all sold out, were very high. That the company printed 8,000 programs for the event, which sold out in record time for a total of $135,000. Match 1. Kazuyuki Fujita and Takashi Iizuka. Takayuki Iizuka beat Kendo Kashin, Tokumitsu Ishizawa, and El Samurai Osamu Matsuda in 8:46 when Iizuka pinned Samurai after a blizzard suplex. Said to have been an average match. Match 2. Akira Nagami, Akira Saiki, and Kengo Kimura, Takashi Kimura, beat Hiro Saito and Tatsutoshi Goto in a Heisei Ishingun vs NWO match in 11:19 when Nagami pinned Saito after a German suplex. Also said to have been average. Match 3. Jushin Liger, Keiichi Yamada, and Tiger King, Satoru Sayama, beat Koji Kanemoto and Tatsuhito Takaiwa in 14:18 when Liger pinned Takaiwa after a Super Fisherman Buster. This match had a story behind it being the first time Liger and Sayama, who are the two most noteworthy junior heavyweight wrestlers in the history of Japan, and arguably the history of pro wrestling itself, teaming up for the first time. It was said to have been a disappointment as Sayama blew up from being too heavy and didn't look good. Match 4. In another New Japan vs NWO match, Michiyoshi Ohara and Hiroyoshi Tenzan, Kwang Kil Choi and Scott Norton beat Tada Yasuda and Satoshi Kojima and Manabu Nakanishi in 12:26 when Norton pinned Yasuda after a powerbomb. Norton suffered a legit leg injury during the match, but after the show appeared to be okay. Match 5. Otani retained the 7-belt J-Crown title beating Pegasus in 1928 with a springboard spin kick and dragon suplex for the pin. This was said to have been an excellent match. These two have had great singles matches in the past, but the high-flying junior heavyweight style doesn't play as well in a big stadium as it does in a smaller building. Don Frye beat Kazuo Yamazaki in 12:21 with a choke sleeper. Frye again played heel, this time doing the Mike Tyson biting Yamazaki's ear and Yamazaki selling it like Evander Holyfield for the big heel spot. It's amazing how much heat a minor heel action can get when it's put in the framework of a believable-looking contest. Frye gave Yamazaki a lot of offense and Frye had to escape to the ropes several times on submissions. Match 7. Naoya Ogawa beat Erwin Vrieker, a kickboxer from Holland, in 3:19 with an armbar submission in a nothing match. Match 8. Sasaki pinned Choshu using Choshu's own favorite lariat in 11:34. This match had a lot of emotion to it with Sasaki crying on his way to the ring. Match 9. Shinya Hashimoto beat Hubert Numrich, a 6'7" kickboxer, this time with something of a real reputation, from Holland with both NHB and K1 experience in a round-style match with a facelock submission in 1:04 of the second round. Match 10. The finale, which was said to have been anticlimactic, saw IWGP Tag Team Champions Keiji Muto and Masahiro Chono beat Tatsumi Fujinami and Genichiro Tenryu in 21:33 when Chono made Fujinami submit to the STF. Norton, Tenzan, Saito, Goto and Ohara were all at ringside and Goto and Ohara are apparently now official NWO members. It would make a good story, considering what the lead story was in last week's Observer, to try and tie in the stupid angle WCW did on its Halloween Havoc pay-per-view with the fake fan getting beaten up with the subsequent two near riots that took place days later. However, even though the timing of WCW's angle couldn't have been worse, as fan violence and a general lack of respect by fans to the product has become more of a problem largely as fans imitate their so-called heroes' television behavior, the near riots may have had nothing to do with imitation being in this case the stupidest form of flattery. In the first incident, it certainly didn't due to the location where it took place. In the second, it may or may not have. Although the ECW situation on October 30 was clearly an example of a group of fans going to matches with the specific intention of causing a disturbance and starting a fight with wrestlers. The first such incident took place on October 29 in Tijuana, the Mexican border city across from San Diego, where WCW pay-per-view shows don't even air, although the show did take place just 2 days after the WCW Nitro taping not all that many miles away in San Diego. The second took place the next night in Plymouth Meeting, Pennsylvania at an ECW house show, although that incident from all accounts was a group of 5 fans going to the matches with the specific intention of getting into a fight. The Tijuana situation in a promo Azteca show came during a post-match angle after the main event, a 16-man elimination tag match with Conan and El Hijo del Santo and La Parca and Rey Mysterio and Dandy and Lizmark Jr. and Super Colo and Hector Garza beating Psicosis and Juventud Guerrera and Los Villanos 4 and V and Damien and Halloween and Silver King and Zando Khan. It came down to Lizmark Jr. and Psychosis, with Lizmark Jr. scoring a clean pin to win the match before about 3,500 fans at Auditorio Municipal, which between the match itself and the post-match lasted 82 minutes, making it probably the longest combination match and angle on a Major League Wrestling show probably in years. At that point, Psychosis began complaining about the officiating when Santo, who Psychosis had eliminated next to last in the match, hit the ring and jumped Psychosis. At this point, Rey Mysterio Jr., who didn't work on the show but was in attendance, hit the ring and jumped on Psychosis, but then also attacked Santo. The idea appeared to be to set up a triangle match between the three tentatively on November 14th in the same building, although that depends on several outside forces, such as possible commission suspensions based on the riot and potential WCW intervention, since the match involves Mysterio Jr. and WCW doesn't want him wrestling in Mexico anymore. Earlier this year, Mysterio Jr. and Santo had a classic match in Tijuana, which resulted in Santo capturing the WWA middleweight title from Mysterio Jr., and at the last Tijuana show, Psychosis scored a clean win over Santo in a match for a title belt that Psychosis was defending, not to mention Mysterio Jr. and Psychosis rivalry in that city dating back many years. However, since Santo has been put over big as a face in Tijuana, the crowd turned on Mysterio Jr. when he attacked Santo. In their singles match earlier in the year, even though it was a total face versus face style and Mysterio Jr. definitely had his fans, it was Santo that was the more popular by a small degree. Mysterio Jr. and Santo exchanged words, and eventually Rey Mysterio hit the ring, and first attacked Psychosis, but then also attacked Santo. Damien and Halloween then hit the ring and began fighting with Santo, who had no allies, and also helping Psychosis against the Mysterios, at which point the crowd began chanting for Conan to make the save, apparently they believed, for Santo. Conan started attacking the Rudos, but then also joined in with the other faces in attacking Santo, which caused the crowd to go nuts, as it appeared Santo was alone against everyone. A fan hit the ring and gave Mysterio a dropkick. Another fan went to hit Mysterio with a chair, but he ended up taking the chair from the fan, which caused more fans to begin throwing chairs at the ring. Supposedly it wound up with more than 200 fans throwing chairs, and much of the rest of the audience, seeing that a riot was breaking out, leaving the building while this was all going on, before everything was calmed down. The idea they were apparently trying to portray as it being everyone for themselves for the triangle match, but with nobody helping Santo, it came off to the crowd that their longtime local heroes like Conan and the Mysterios had turned heel on Santo. The next night at the ECW show at the National Guard Armory in Plymouth Meeting, Pennsylvania, saw a very different type of crowd disturbance. According to several witnesses, a group of 3 or 5, the police claimed 3 people, but some ringsiders said it was actually 5. Big tough-looking guys were at ringside at the ECW show looking for trouble from the start of the night. It was more likely coincidental, the timing of this disturbance and the WCW angle, although there is always a possibility that the WCW angle glorifying fans fighting wrestlers may have put the idea into someone's head, and that this is another example, and this may have been one harder to avoid than most, of problems that are happening with far too much frequency at ECW events. The ringleader, wearing a shirt that said "Fight Me" on the front and Antichrist 316 on the back, were harassing the wrestlers throughout the show. One person close to the situation all night described those few as the worst group of wrestling fans ever to attend an ECW show. During the first match on the card, ECW security asked them to quit leaning over the rail and spitting, and they shouted down security. The feeling was they should have been removed then and there. Although Paul Heyman, defending his security team, which many fans close to the situation were critical of for not doing anything when it became apparent that something bad was going to go down, claimed they were misbehaving but not doing anything that would warrant being thrown out. Others close to the situation said security realized to throw them out would end up starting a big fight, and perhaps they were trying to avoid that. The fans did cause some minor changes regarding working the matches, in that the wrestlers were all avoided where the fans were, and even Taz, whose gimmick is to stand up to fans, was avoiding doing anything near them. With just a few matches left in the show, with Axel Rotten and Balls Mahoney versus New Jack and John Kronus wrestling in the ring, and time running out on Mr. Fight Me and his group, trouble started. According to reports filed by 2 Plymouth, Pennsylvania detectives who happened to be at the matches, Richard Leffler, 26, and Mark Chesky, 23 of Conshohocken, were spitting on wrestler John Reschner, Mahoney. According to the report, when Reschner was outside the ring in their vicinity, Leffler punched him in the back. When Reschner turned around to see who hit him, Leffler punched him in the face. At that point, Leffler grabbed his hair, allowing Chesky to get in a shot on him. At this point, Reschner started covering his face and throwing wild blows to protect himself. The ECW dressing room emptied at this point, and it was 10 to 20 minutes before the situation started getting back to order, with Mahoney, Axel Rotten, John Kronus, Shane Douglas, Tommy Dreamer and Bubba Ray and Big Dick Dudley among others joining in the fray. Reports are the Dudleys were going through the crowd like buzzsaws, and that Big Dick seemed impervious to anything thrown at him, almost like his pro wrestling gimmick. By the time the incident was over, about half the crowd of 800 fans were outside the building, either trying to get away from the near riot, or some trying to get close to it, as the 5 fans and the wrestlers fought. There were fans injured being too close to the wild swinging wrestlers and fans, although there were no reports of serious injuries, although ambulance units were on the scene. Just as the situation was calming down, approximately 40 police officers from several different neighboring municipalities, including East Norristown, Whitemarsh, Conshohocken, West Conshohocken, and Whitpain, several dressed in riot gear and one with a police dog, arrived on the scene. Various reports from the scene claim that the wrestlers, who were trying to protect their own and whose actions were defended in the police report, in their exuberance, made things worse as far as getting the crowd all panicked, and that when the police arrived, the situation was calming down and their arrival made them worse again. Others said it was simply a bad situation. There was additional heat since ECW, according to a local newspaper story, had failed to get a permit to hold a wrestling show in the city, which was expressly specified in the contract they signed with the building. The incident made a lot of local press, both in the newspapers, and was carried as a top local news item on most of the area radio stations. Wrestlers Reschner and Jerome Young, New Jack, went to the police station for questioning, largely to have complaints failed against the 2 fans, who were expected to be arrested on charges of assault, disorderly conduct and harassment, and the 2 fans were taken to jail that night. Paul Heyman said that he was going to order Reschner to testify against the fans to get them put away, even if it meant him missing a major show. Just as the dressing room emptied, Heyman grabbed New Jack to keep him from joining in on the fight, largely because any problems with New Jack could reflect badly on the company at this point, with the Aerocula's legal and civil situations still pending. There were reports that the police wanted the show stopped at that point, however Paul Heyman denied that being a problem. After everything got under a little bit of control, Dreamer got on the PA and got the fans who had remained in the building back into the show by saying that they didn't want to let the action of 3 people ruin the night for everyone else, and they went through with the 3-way dance main event with Sabu going over Douglas and Dreamer. Not to be outdone, the WWF on its live Raw show on November 3rd did its own fan out of the audience angle with similar results, in this case glorifying it even more, allowing the fan, former Stampede Wrestling performer Steve Blackman, a one-time roommate of Brian Pillman in Calgary in 1988, who for the past decade has been living in Pennsylvania teaching martial arts and will end up being the 4th member of Team USA, replacing the injured Patriot with Goldust and Vader, and Mark Merrow versus Jim Neidhart and Davey Boy Smith and Phil LaFawn and Doug Furness at Survivor Series. Obviously a wrestler doing a martial arts gimmick the way the heels sold for him, who it appeared would wind up being the 4th member of the Team USA, replacing Del Wilkes in the Survivor Series. Fan out of the audience angles are as old as Carnival Wrestling itself. In fact, the mark who isn't really a mark out of the audience was one of the classic Carnival Wrestling cons, but in this day and age with real fan violence becoming such a serious problem, encouraging and glorifying it in any company at this point in time, and to an extent all 3 major US companies have, is irresponsible almost to mind-boggling levels. Just as an example, over the past week of something we know happened specifically due to the incident in Las Vegas. The very next night, at the WCW taping in San Diego, during the commercial break, a fan threw something and nailed Johnny Grunge, and security did throw him out. But those sitting near the fan reported that the fan had been talking the entire show about doing a run-in for self-publicity, talking over and over again about how the fan who did the same thing the night before really didn't get hurt or didn't appear to get in trouble. Semaphore Entertainment Group held a press conference in Tokyo on October 30 to officially announce in Japan its pay-per-view card coming from the 17,100-seat Yokohama Arena on December 21. At the press conference representing Semaphore Entertainment Group were company CEO Bob Marowitz, David Isaacs, who heads the promotion of the UFC, and Tank Abbott. What was officially announced at the show was a heavyweight title match with Maurice Smith defending, although no opponent was named. Negotiations for Hoist Gracie to be that opponent were said to be serious, but the rumor mill has it that Gracie is leaning more toward doing a match on the Pride 2 show on January 18 in the same building against a Japanese opponent. The monkey wrench in getting Gracie versus Smith could be Semaphore Entertainment Group's offer of wanting Gracie to sign a 2-fight deal to guarantee at least 1 title defense if he were to beat Smith, and that the Gracies probably wouldn't be as amenable to a title defense against a wrestler the caliber of Randy Couture or more. A 2-fight contract wouldn't guarantee Gracie ever having to come back to defend the title if he were to beat Smith, but if he signed it and decided not to come back to UFC, he wouldn't be able to fight for another organization until fulfilling that second date, which would put his fighting career on ice. Another name mentioned as a possible opponent once again is Marco Ruiz. As mentioned last week, the Japanese promoters aren't hot on the idea of Couture, who earned the title shot with a win over Vitor Belfort, who has no name in Japan, being in a drawing position in the main event. They also announced a match to create the first middleweight, under 200 pounds, champion with Kevin Jackson, the 1992 Olympic gold medal winning freestyle wrestler who is 3-0 in NHB competition, facing the winner of a match on November 29 in Tokyo on a Shudo Promotion Veil Tudo event between the Shudo World Heavyweight Champion Inson Inoue vs. Frank Shamrock. This would give the winner of the Inoue vs. Shamrock match, which could be a long and fairly brutal bout, 3 weeks to recover for a match with Jackson. Also announced is that there would be a 4-man heavyweight tournament, and likely 2 or possibly 3 additional super fights. Rumors coming out of Japan from the press conference included talk of a match with Ruiz vs. Mark Kerr, although we're told that there is almost 0% chance of that match happening, and a first-round tournament match with Abbott vs. Nobuhiko Takada plus a super fight involving Belfort, likely against a Japanese opponent. As strange as the Takada-Abbott match sounds, that match was very much being seriously talked about for a number of reasons, among them the belief there is still some drawing power left in Takada, that he personally needs redemption, and that the show needs a pro wrestler for mainstream coverage and drawing power in Japan, and also the belief that under UFC rules that Abbott would beat him. It would give Abbott a win that UFC wants him to have, since they believe for marketing purposes he still has value to the company, which has always been a different controversial issue. However, Takada was interviewed backstage at the November 3rd Kingdom show at Korakuen Hall and claimed he broke a rib from a kick and suffered a broken arm from the finishing armbar in the match with Rickson Gracie, and that he hasn't been able to train since and wouldn't be able to return to competition until January. There was some hope his first match back would be on the Pride 2 show on January 18, although he may not be ready by then. Takada also claimed he went into the Gracie match with a neck injury and wasn't nearly at 100%. The belief in Japan is that the only way this event will sell a lot of tickets is that if a big-name Japanese pro wrestler is involved. There doesn't appear to be any way Masakatsu Funaki, who would be the best bet of all from a combination of both credibility and marketability, would do it, because he's shown no interest, and also due to the proximity of this show with his own Pancrase title challenge to Yuki Kondo, so they are left with a top name from rings, Kiyoshi Tamura, Yoshihisa Yamamoto and Tsuyoshi Kosaka being the best bets, because there is no way Akira Maeda would do it. Although this taking place in the middle of the Battle Dimension tournament makes any of those names exceedingly unlikely, or a joke like Koji Kiao, who has done UFC before, losing in less than 1 minute on a fluke punch to Mark Hall, and at this point probably wouldn't mean much when it comes to drawing anyway. The other problem is, if a Japanese pro wrestler is involved, there is a chance outside forces will pressure for it to be a work at the last minute to protect them. Severn vs. Matsunaga, both in reputation and from injury, and an obvious work at this point would be devastating to UFC's credibility. The problem is also justifying including a Japanese pro wrestler to the American pay-per-view audience unless it's someone who is a legitimate proven shooter. Most reports indicate that the shoot match that at this point would be the most marketable in Japan would be Rickson Gracie vs. Maeda, which Maeda would likely never agree to unless it was his absolute final hurrah, even though there is already a lot of hype building to that as Maeda's retirement match late next year. UFC was also the subject in a huge front-page story in the November 1st Los Angeles Times entitled Gory Sport Fights for Its Life. The story, better researched than most on the subject, focused on the history of UFC, its beginnings, promoters Merowitz and Isaacs, and all its subsequent legal, political, and cable problems. It said that by 1994, when the PPV's buy rates peaked with the second Gracie vs. Shamrock and first Shamrock vs. Severn matches, UFC brought in a flow of cash like a Texas gusher. The story was very pro-Gracie, with Horian and his concept of no rules fighting being portrayed as the purist who had to get out when Merowitz tampered with the pure form by instituting time limits and judges' decisions, and more recently, the other various rule changes in an attempt to get the shows back on a cable industry that hasn't budged from its stance. The story called the Gracie family perhaps the most remarkable family in the history of sports. It talked about the Gracie-Severn match and said how all the television went blank in the middle of the show. Actually, it was only about 1/3 of the homes, which caused UFC to have to implement time limits, which Horian Gracie said would kill the show, ignoring the realities that if time limits hadn't have been imposed, Hoyce and Ken Shamrock may still be lying on the mat in Charlotte today waiting for the other to make a mistake. It portrayed the beginning of the fall when rival promoter Donald Zuckerman, EFC, moved a show in New York City, which ended up undoing all the work UFC had done in getting a bill passed to allow UFC rules matches in the state. Actually, the real set of dominoes that have crippled UFC were largely 3 things: lobbying by Arizona Senator John McCain, a staunch boxing proponent, the appointment of Leo Hindry, a staunch UFC opponent from the start, who was quoted in the story as saying the first 2 things he did on the first day when he got his new job as the head of TCI was to find where the bathroom was in the building, and to cancel showing UFC as the man to lead TCI cable out of its own financial nightmare, and the series of articles in the New York Times which made UFC a national news story and caused all the politicians in the state legislature to do an about-face on the subject after voting on what the media portrayed as the wrong side of an open and shut brutality issue. While the story did mention Rorion Gracie's belief that his vision of the sport would have blown boxing in the U.S. away in time and out of McCain's own boxing background, it never tied in the point of much of the political infrastructure working against UFC, Hindari being an exception, had political and/or financial ties to the boxing industry. Japanese television rundown. September 28 FMW. The Kawasaki Stadium show aired on a 2-week tape delay and digest form on the Samurai Channel. Most of the undercard matches were edited down to about 5 minutes, and the best match on the show, the tag match with Hayabusa and Jinsei Shinzaki vs. Kenta Kobashi and Monakia Mossman, didn't air at all, nor was it even acknowledged, I guess as part of the deal with All Japan to get them to work the match. After seeing the Gladiator vs. Masato Tanaka's match, if the tag match blew away everything else on the card, which was the report from everyone that was there live, it must have been one hell of a match. Similarly, last year when UFI used Toshiaki Kawada at its Jingu Stadium show, the Kawada match was edited off the UFI home video of the card. Some comments on what did air. The show opened with a Royal Rumble-style battle royal that went 28-49, ending when Tetsuhiro Kuroda pinned Riki Fuji after a Thunderfire powerbomb, which is the hot move in this promotion due to it being Onita's finisher. After the match, Kuroda was presented with a check for 10 million yen, $85,000, so the ridiculous American Wrestling Alliance Monopoly Battle Royal money tradition, not that American Wrestling Alliance was alone with the fake money battle royals, but they were the campiest doing things like $500,000 and even $1 million battle royals, long after the American Wrestling Alliance has folded. The match appeared to be awful, with only the campy ring entrance of Mr. Pogo 2 with the bleached blonde hair, Zubaz, t-shirt and Kane a la Sandman, and a few spots by the Headhunters being decent. Then came a women's tag match with Crusher Maidamari and Miss Mongol beating Kaori Nakayama and Miwa Sato in a bad match. Hisakatsu Oya and Mr. Ganasuke beat Geto and Jado to keep the World Brass Knucks tag team titles when Ganasuke pinned Geto after a splash off the top rope in a good match. Shark Tsuchiya's win over Asia Kong was heavily gimmicked, with tons of outside interference by Maidamari, and Mongol, wearing an ECF&W t-shirt. Tsuchiya pulled out a large knife and was carving Kong's forehead up with it, and she was bleeding puddles. At the end, Tsuchiya sprayed the fire extinguisher in her eyes. The gimmickry probably hurt the match more than helped it. The loser leaves town, yeah, right. Terry Funk vs. Hiromichi Fuyuki match for the Texas title ended with Funk scoring a pin after a moonsault. Funk juiced heavily. Geto and Jado were interfering frequently to help Fuyuki, which brought out the Headhunters to help Funk, one of whom splashed Fuyuki off the top right before the finish. Based on the clips, it appeared to be a good match. Ken Shamrock vs. Vader was heavily edited and then cut short due to Shamrock's injury, but no question they were the stiffest on the show, pounding the hell out of each other in a Ufi-style bout except using more punches. Vader had noticeable swelling under the eyes and he was beating on Shamrock good as well. The match was suddenly stopped early when Shamrock was coughing up blood, but it appeared they were building toward what would have been a really good match. The next match was a show stealer with Masato Tanaka winning both the Independent and Brass Knucks heavyweight titles from the Gladiator. Most of this match aired and it was a 4 1/4 stars match. It's generally a fair comparison to make of ECW and FMW because of the style similarities and both being kind of the cult garbage promotions in each respective culture. The first 2 matches on this show were like bad ECW, maybe even worse than that. This match was a lot better than any ECW match that has been on television in a long time. It had both the wrestling and the brawling going for it, not to mention some high-risk spots by a large man in Gladiator and built well to boot. Tanaka is a good worker and Gladiator can do impressive things but usually doesn't work smooth matches. But they really clicked here. Gladiator did an awesome running dive over the top. They used 2 table spots, the second of which was Gladiator teasing his awesome bomb over the top through a table, but Tanaka thwarted him twice and eventually threw Gladiator over the top with an awesome bomb, and actually Gladiator went too far and landed at a bad angle on his neck on the floor but still broke the table, and didn't appear to be injured. When they got back in the ring, after several near falls, Tanaka hit a 3rd powerbomb for the pin. The main event of Atsushi Onita vs. Wayne Kanemura was notable more for the explosions than the wrestling. The bombs were bigger than ever before, so it was an interesting spectacle to watch, but as far as wrestling went, with Kanemura going in with a broken leg and Onita being so limited in what he can do, there really wasn't much to it other than the spectacle. As mentioned before, if you've never seen it before, the explosive bomb matches are riveting, but Onita has now been doing them for years and they all pretty well look the same and go the same way. October 5 All Japan, 1. Johnny Ace and Johnny Smith beat Akira Tao and Yoshinari Ogawa in 14:24 when Smith pinned Ogawa with a reverse DDT. A run-of-the-mill All Japan undercard match without much heat. 1 1/4 stars. 2. Stan Hansen and Bobby Duncombe Jr. beat Toshiaki Kawada and Masao Inoue in 15:07 when Duncombe pinned Inoue with a power slam coming off the ropes. The finish was supposed to be a reverse DDT off the middle rope, but Duncombe totally blew the spot. Inoue worked most of the match taking punishment. Duncombe selling is a lot better since he started coming to Japan, but his offense still isn't up to par. 1 1/4 stars. October 10 Michinoku Pro Wrestling. This was the group's biggest show of the year from Tokyo Sumo Hall, which aired the entire show in its entirety on the Samurai Network. Overall, I'd rate it as a very good show. Match 1. Yone Jinjin beat Magic Man in 1:53. Magic Man is actually a magician who did about a 5-minute performance before his match that the crowd seemed to like. Miss Mongol FMW wrestler Aki Kambayashi managed Jinjin. At one point Magic Man put a spell on Jinjin to get a momentary advantage. Jinjin came back and got a submission using a form of a torture rack. Magic Man can barely work, but it was short, and except for the silly spell, it was at least a passable short match. Dud. Match 2. Tiger Mask and Gran Hamada beat Chris Candido and the Convict in 13:55. Convict is Los Angeles indie wrestler Sergio Torres, who is better known with a different mask as Superboy. First half of the match was slow, but it picked up halfway through and turned into a good match. Hamada, a few weeks shy of his 47th birthday, has to be the best worker in the business for his age, as he was easily the best performer in this match. Convict did a lot of hot moves, including a splash off the top, a second rope moonsault and an Osai moonsault, which he was actually wide left with. Candido also looked good. Finish saw Hamada use a Frankensteiner off the top on Convict. He then climbed to the top as if he was going to do a crossbody, but instead grabbed the head and planted him with a DDT, almost like doing a buff blockbuster, but instead ending as a DDT, similar to the finish of the Chris Benoit vs. Shinjiro Otani Cruiserweight Tournament final in 1995. Finishing move was excellent. 3 stars. Match 3. Satoru Sayama beat El Satanico in 6:38. The gimmick here was it was the first meeting between the two, who feuded in Mexico over the NWA middleweight title in the late 1970s, since 1980 when Satanico won the belt and Sayama left Mexico. Life has changed a lot since then. Satanico is certainly no middleweight, nor for that matter, is Sayama, who seemed embarrassed going to the ring to be doing lucha libre after all the shooting in his blood. Still, even at 39, Sayama is the quickest man as far as movement in the entire business. His kicks looked great. He missed a tope, giving Satanico an advantage, and Satanico carried the body of the match. Sayama delivered a DDT, which is an interesting story in itself. When Sayama was in his heyday, he introduced the move, at the time called a Tiger Driver. A different move is now called the Tiger Driver today, years before Jake Roberts used it and named it the DDT. It was actually a move out of Lucha Libre that Black Gordman used as his finisher in Texas in the early 70s. Anyway, finish came out of nowhere with no build, as Satanico was doing an old-style wrestler choke and Sayama grabbed the arm and put it in the cross-arm breaker for the submission. Sayama looked better than he usually does, but finish came out of nowhere and match was too short. 1 1/2 star. Match 4. Undertaker pinned Hakushi, Kensuke Jinsei Shinzaki, in 12:18. Undertaker was managed by Bruce Pritchard, who his brother Love was his original manager before Paul Bearer was brought into WWF. Undertaker got a good, but not a great reaction. Match was slow-paced, as both worked that kind of style, but everything was solid. Highlight was a spot where Undertaker went to deliver a choke slam, but Hakushi got so high that he flipped in mid-air and landed on his feet, but Taker delivered an enzouidri. Hakushi worked on the knee. He used a pescado, but Taker caught him and rammed his back into the post twice. After Hakushi missed a headbutt off the top, Undertaker used a choke slam for a near fall and a tombstone for the finish. 2 stars. Match 5. Super Delphin and now Hiro Hoshikawa and Masato Yakashiji beat Dick Togo and Men's Teo and Shuichi Funaki in 1844. Excellent match, although slightly below the level of their ECW match and well below the level of their match of the year at the same building on the same day last year. Delphin was really juiced up and it was his first match back, so he was the focus. Teo came out in a fur coat. Togo wore a shirt that read Dick Mania on it. Last 5 minutes were the non-stop big moves, near falls and dives, ending when Delphin used his Delphin clutch to pin Togo. 4 1/4 stars. Great Sasuke beat Takamichinoku in 28-21. Sunny was the ring announcer for this match and she did a great job, as she pronounces everything correctly and takes care in getting names in foreign cities and phrases down. Victor Quiñones managed Taka. Masakatsu Funaki was introduced before the match and watched it from ringside. This was a very good match, but not as good as their Calgary or Edmonton matches. The problem was that they were trying to drag it out and try and do a 30-minute classic match when these guys are really at their best at around 15 minutes. As great a worker as Taka is, when he tried to do a match this long, you could see his weaknesses in comparison to the top All Japan wrestlers. In addition, Sasuke, although he did all his spots, is lacking fire, probably because of the pain from all the injuries. Match was well laid out as they started doing Veil Tudo style spots, since Taka did one match this year with Pancrase. They next built to doing typical pro wrestling mat work and submissions. They built to working on Sasuke's knee. Then Taka blocked Sasuke's trademark spots. Finally they both hit their big moves, but the crowd never really got with it after the explosive previous match because of the length of this bout. They did all their hot moves, with Sasuke doing the Asai moonsault and rider kick, which actually fell a little short. Taka did his jump on the top rope, then reversed his position on the top rope and moonsaulted off the top onto Sasuke on the floor. After several near falls, Sasuke used a German suplex for the pin. 3 3/4 stars. October 12 All Japan, 1. Mitsuharu Misawa pinned Steve Williams in 24-21 to retain the Triple Crown. Match was slow for the first 10 minutes but picked up and turned into a good match. This wasn't at the level of some of their classic matches over the past few years, nor what you'd expect from a Triple Crown defense, but that isn't unexpected either, considering Williams was working a long singles match. Misawa got the pin after 2 Tiger drivers. 3 1/4 stars. October 18 New Japan, 1. Don Frye beat Kazuyuki Fujita in 6:02 with the choke and body scissors combination. This was interesting because they broke pro wrestling down to its simplest level, working a believable rings type style in which simply not breaking clean on the ropes drew tremendous heat. Frye wouldn't break clean twice and got booed like crazy. Then when Fujita wouldn't break, a face pop was huge. These two work well together given the confines that the style would allow, especially if you consider that both are rookies and that this was only Frye's third Major League Pro match. 2 1/4 stars, 2. Ogawa beat Brian Johnston in 11-14 with the STO, a quick judo takedown, and choke finish. Johnston had a good presence in the ring and pretty much controlled the early portion of the match, which was decent. Johnston was good considering this was his first pro match, but Ogawa really isn't of any help and looked bad. Johnston was out there too long, seemed to blow up, and the match fell apart in the last few minutes. Ogawa sold twice that Johnston had knocked him down, which got the fans into the match and put Johnston over. Frye and Ogawa had a pull-apart stare down after the match. 1/4 star, 3. Shinya Hashimoto beat Zane Frazier in 1:05 of the third round with a cross armbreaker submission. It was basically Hashimoto selling early to get the newcomer over. Frazier did a worked boxing gimmick, but worked boxing looks pretty bad. In comparison to a rings match, which is what this should look like, it was bad. Frazier only took one hard kick in the second round, and the pro wrestlers that Hashimoto works with take flurries. Finish was decent. 1/4 star, 4. Great Muta and Masahiro Chono beat Kensuke Sasaki and Kazuo Yamazaki in the non-title match in 17:30. About 8 minutes aired on television. This wasn't much wrestling, mainly all story. Chono accidentally hit Muta with a flying shoulder block and Muta walked out. This left Chono, the heel, in a 1-on-2 situation. So Hiroyoshi Tenzan and Hiro Saito interfered freely and Chono hit Sasaki with a baseball bat and hit Yamazaki 3 times with a bat to keep the heat up, and have it make sense that Chono had Sasaki in the STF when Keiji Muto ran out for the apparent save. Muto then attacked Sasaki instead of Chono. Over teasing heat attacked Chono. This was actually done a little too quick for maximum dramatic purposes. Muto ended up pinning Sasaki after a moonsault. Not much in the way of wrestling at all, as the match was mainly just a backdrop for the one spot to lead to Keiji Muto, as opposed to Great Muta being an NWO member for the NWO Typhoon Tour. 1 1/2 star. October 19 All Japan, 1. Manukia Mossman and Hayabusa beat Kentaro Shiga and Jun Akiyama in 18-12. This was a great match. In particular, Mossman is showing incredible improvement. He and Tatsuhito Takaiwa may be the most improved wrestlers of the past year. Hayabusa is flowing with his style a lot better as he gets more experience at it, and the guys he's working with are fitting into his strengths as well. All 4 looked good. Very physical, but also a lot of fast moves and flying moves building to the near falls and saves. Finally, Hayabusa pinned Shiga after a Firebird, 450, splash. 3 3/4 stars, 2. Tag champs Ace and Kenta Kobashi beat Tao and Kawada in 24-16. Match was joined in progress. They worked on Kobashi's injured leg early. This built into an excellent match with the fast-moving high-impact near falls and dramatic kickouts and saves. At one point all the lights went out momentarily, but this was just a building power outage rather than an angle that got a big pop. There were some incredible exchanges with Kobashi involved against both men. Finally Ace hit the Cobra Clutch suplex off the ropes, but Tao kicked out. After 2 more Cobra Clutch suplexes, Ace scored a surprising pin on Tao. 4 1/4 stars. October 25, New Japan. 1. Tatsumi Fujinami and Kengo Kimura and Akira Nagami beat Hiro Saito and Michioshi Ohara and Tatsutoshi Goto in 10:02. Only 3:15 aired on television and it looked okay, with Nagami pinning Goto with a German suplex for the finish. After the match, Goto and Ohara destroyed the Heisei Ishingun flag. Kimura and Nagami of High looked mad while Fujinami didn't seem to care about the flag angle. 2. Manabu Nakanishi and Satoshi Kojima and Hashimoto beat NWO Sting and Michael Wallstreet and Tenzan in 15:10. Only the last 4:30 aired. Tenzan had to carry the match for the heel side since Sting and Wallstreet didn't do much. Boy is juice plentiful in this promotion right now, and I don't mean blood. Nakanishi racked Wallstreet for the submission. Below average. 3. Shinjiro Otani pinned Jushin Liger after a springboard leg lariat in 14:27. The last 8 minutes aired on television, and it was the expected outstanding match. Liger hit a plancha early. Otani did all his trademark spots, and then kicked out of a fisherman buster, a super fisherman buster and a palm thrust, all of which looked to be the finish. Liger tried a superplex, but Otani reversed it in mid-air and crashed on him, and immediately hit a dragon suplex, but Liger kicked out. 4 1/4 stars. 4. Muto and Chono captured the IWGP Tag titles from Yamazaki and Sasaki in 24:23. The last 13 minutes aired on television. It wasn't that greatly early in Sasaki in, but picked up, particularly toward the finish that was dramatic and heated. Sasaki at his knee worked over much of the match and was doing a great job of selling. At one point he went for his Northern Lights bomb on Chono but dropped him because the knee gave out. Chono used a low blow and STF, and Sasaki did a tremendous job of teasing the submission and came up with one of the more dramatic rope break spots you'll ever see. They kept working on the knee and Muto got the figure 4 on in the middle while Chono put Yamazaki in the STF. Sasaki held on forever hoping for Yamazaki to break out and save him until he finally couldn't take any more pain and submitted. Finish was excellent. 3 3/4 stars. New Japan. Besides the Dome show, the biggest show of the week was October 31 in Hiroshima for a sellout 5,300 fans for NWO Sold Out, the final event of the NWO Typhoon Tour, with Kensuke Sasaki beating Masahiro Chono in 22:10 with a Northern Lights bomb to retain the IWGP Heavyweight title. It was a pretty loaded-up show, as NWO Sting and Keiji Muto beat Shinya Hashimoto and Kazuo Yamazaki when Muto pinned Hashimoto after a Frankensteiner off the top rope in 21:10. A best-of-3 fall match saw Heisei Ishingun team of Akitoshi Saito and Akira Nagami and Kunyaki Kobayashi and Kengo Kimura and Tatsumi Fujinami beat the NWO team of Michioshi Ohara and Tatsutoshi Goto and Hiro Saito and Hiroyoshi Tenzan and Michael Wallstreet when Fujinami used the Dragon Sleeper on Ohara in the deciding fall. The other key event was a survival series of singles matches with the masked team of Jushin Liger and El Samurai and Kendo Kashin going against the younger upcoming stars Koji Kanemoto and Shinjiro Otani and Tatsuhito Takaiwa. It opened with Kashin vs Kanemoto, with Kashin scoring the upset in 11 minutes. Takaiwa then came in and pinned Kashin in 59 seconds. Liger pinned Takaiwa in 5:06. Otani pinned Liger in 3:36, leaving Otani with Samurai, and Otani pinned him as well, coming out as the Ultimate Survivor in 5:36. This was strange booking since Otani already has the J Crown, and was about to get the big win over Wild Pegasus at the Fukuoka Dome, so apparently they are trying to build him up big at this point. After the Dome show, in Otani's post-match interview, he was building up Kashin, who beat him in a non-title match on October 23 in Kumamoto, and Liger as his top contenders. New Japan made some minor changes in the tag team tournament due to the injury to Marcus Bagwell. NWO Sting will now team with Hiroyoshi Tenzan. Tenzan was scheduled as the partner of Michioshi Ohara, so Ohara's new partner will be his regular partner, Tatsutoshi Goto. If anything, it makes this tournament even more boring. October 18 TV did a 2.9 rating. NHB. I finally caught a tape of the Vale Tudo from Brazil where Gary Goodridge beat Pedro Otavio in the finals with a supposed groin claw. Actually, that report turned out to be untrue, as the finish was clearly Goodridge knocking Otavio silly with a knee to the head and then hit a flurry of punches on the ground. A few minutes earlier in the grueling match there was a spot where Goodridge was trying to maneuver himself out of a defensive position and stuck his foot into Pedro's trunks and tried to push off. After Goodridge won there were loud Portuguese chants of faggot for that move, but the move was a few minutes before the finish. November 30th in Sao Paulo, Brazil will be a tournament featuring U.S. amateur wrestling star Mike Van Arsdale in his first NHB match. John Lewis vs. Rumina Sato was added to the November 29th World Veil Tudo show at Tokyo Bay's NK Hall. The two met last year going to a 24-minute draw, although Lewis dominated the entire match which didn't have provision for judges' decisions. Duzelberto remains in critical condition at Bayfront Hospital in St. Petersburg, Florida, after an auto accident on October 4. He is able to hear, but can't respond and is on both a respirator and kidney dialysis. He's had 4 surgeries including for a crushed femur bone and pelvis. ECW. Aside from the problem at the Plymouth Meeting, Pennsylvania show, it was largely a series of good house shows over the weekend. Reports are that with guys like Jerry Lynn, Paul Diamond, Al Snow, Just Incredible, Phil LaFon, Doug Furness, the latter two of whom may have worked their final weekend here, and now Tommy Rogers working as regulars, the match quality underneath is solid. This keeps the brawls to the top of the show, so the cards don't get to where all the matches are brawls, which makes the matches look too similar. Rogers debuted this weekend, losing to Credible twice and beating Roadkill, and looked good, particularly a hot finishing move. Plymouth Meeting, Pennsylvania drew a sellout of 800 on October 30. The debut in Stamford, Connecticut on October 31 drew about 1,000. That show saw several of the wrestlers use their old Titan gimmicks for Halloween. Snow came out as Avatar holding his mask. Credible wore his Aldo Montoya gimmick. Jerry Lynn came out with a mask as Mr. J.L. Shane Douglas worked as Dean Douglas and Chris Condito as Skip, with Douglas doing a speech trashing Titan about what a marketing genius Vince was in regard to his failed Titan gimmick. Rob Van Dam dressed up as Sabu and looked remarkably like him. Heel ref Jeff Jones dressed as former heel ref Bill Alfonso. Blue Meanie and Supernova came out as Big Daddy Fool and the Heartburn Kid, coming out to Michael's music, with Douglas and Condito destroying them. They had a Tommy Dreamer vs. Rob Van Dam flag match which saw Dreamer win and proclaim Stamford as ECW country. Joey Styles, who lives in Stamford, gave heel announcer/manager Lance Wright a low blow. Dreamer was limping real bad all week but continuing to work. Sandman didn't appear at any of the shows, resting his internal injuries. There was a lot of heat early in the week between Sandman and Taz stemming from interviews both have given. Sandman was mad at Taz for running down Todd Gordon as the mole trying to ruin ECW from the inside, so he ran down Taz, but since then everything has been worked out. The heat was more between Taz and former good friend Perry Saturn on the belief that Saturn was going to copy Taz's gimmick when he won the WCW TV title in Philadelphia. Although there were similarities in wearing the hood and mainly using suplexes and submissions, you couldn't really call it a copy of the gimmick. November 1st in Elizabeth, New Jersey drew 1,557 fans with Sabu beating Dreamer and Douglas in a 3-way dance on top. On TV this week, Styles did a monologue about the Rude/Bigelow/Douglas situation as a spoof on Jim Cornette, holding up a tennis racket at the end of his speech. TV matches from the ECW arena aired with FBI beating New Jack and Cronus for the tag belts with Dudley's interference, 3/4 star Axel Rotten and Balls Mahoney beating Dudley's, 1/2 star Furnace and LaFon losing to Condito and Lance Storm in a solid match, 2 3/4 stars, and Taz and Van Dam going to a no decision with outside interference from Sabu, Alfonso, Dreamer, Beulah, Pit Bulls, Lance Wright and finally Bigelow. This wasn't as good as some of the previous matches between the two. 2.5 stars. According to Japanese magazines, Great Sasuke has agreed to work dates on November 14th, November 20th through the 23rd, December 26th through 27 and January 10 in ECW before undergoing reconstructive knee surgery. WCW. Tickets for the Hogan vs. Sting match on December 28th at the MCI Center, 22,000 capacity not accounting for television production kills, in Washington, D.C. go on sale November 15th in the Baltimore/Washington area at $100, $35, $25 and $15. This is almost surely going to be the biggest first day, biggest crowd, biggest gate, biggest pay-per-view revenue etc. in the history of the company. The Hogan vs. Piper cage match from Havoc drew a company record for buys and gross revenue on pay-per-view, an estimated 300,000 buys, 1.1 buy rate, and $3.52 million. For all the complaints about how bad the age in the cage match was, and it surely was that bad, the job of those on top is to sell tickets and Hogan is still the man in this business. The job of the guys underneath is to give you good matches. Between that pay-per-view buy rate and the ratings of Escape from Devil's Island, which did a 4.2 in its premiere, making it among the most watched made-for-cable movies ever. Hogan's internal power is as strong if not stronger than ever before. Dallas Page on Nitro said he was in one of the two main events of the biggest drawing pay-per-view in wrestling history on Nitro, although every WrestleMania from 1987 to 1996 did in excess of 300,000 buys, as did many other WWF PPVs during that time period, and that's with a much smaller total universe of homes. WCW has had numerous shows draw a larger buy rate in the past, but not more buys because pay-per-view is in more homes now than during the 80s peak period in wrestling. Not to downplay these numbers, because they are bigger numbers than Hogan drew with the likes of Vader and in the retirement match with Flair, and with all the mainstream hype earlier this year for Dennis Rodman. The new revised lineup for the undercard of the Detroit pay-per-view show, Detroit Advance, has topped $340,000, besides the three-ring Battle Royal is a U.S. title match with no DQ with Curt Hennig vs. Ric Flair, a TV title match with Perry Saturn vs. Disco Inferno, a Cruiserweight title match with Rey Mysterio Jr. vs. Eddie Guerrero, and a rematch with Ultimo Dragon vs. Yuji Nagata. They were planning on doing Steve McMichael vs. Bill Goldberg, but that's questionable due to Goldberg's groin pull. It appears the Giant vs. Kevin Nash match has been nixed by Nash, as on the TV interviews Giant talked about meeting Nash in the Battle Royal but never mentioned a singles match. We've also heard that Nash isn't going to be back in the ring until Starrcade. There has been tons of hype about Larry Zbyszko vs. Scott Hall, but I don't think that'll be taking place until Starrcade either, but they may do some kind of gimmick match with Zbyszko vs. Eric Bischoff before then. The political situation in 1998 is going to be incredibly weird, with Sting, Hogan, Flair, Bret, Piper, Savage, Hall and Nash all under one roof fighting for creative control, so to speak. With the 7 figures plus freed in the WWF talent budget by Hart leaving, don't be shocked to see members of the aforementioned cast who don't survive at the top of the hill to start looking to see if they can find the top of a different hill. Nitro on November 3rd at the Spectrum in Philadelphia drew 15,366, 13,155 paying $219,323, $102,233 in merchandise. The show opened with 2 dark matches that didn't get over at all with the crowd. The legendary Chavo Guerrero Sr., at the age of 48, was brought in and beat Lenny Lane in a slow match, although Chavo did use his moonsault block as his finisher. Chavo Sr. hasn't wrestled regularly in many years, and it showed, and new fans have no clue about a guy whose heyday was the mid and late 70s. Disco Inferno beat Jacqueline with a Stone Cold Stunner. This didn't get over at all. After the match, Harlem Heat destroyed Disco. TV show started with Eddie Guerrero and Dean Malenko beating Rey Mysterio Jr. and Steven Regal in one of those triple-A-type Parejas Increíbles-type matches. Mysterio Jr. was awesome. It ended with Guerrero power bombing Rey, but as he climbed up for the frog splash, Malenko tagged his back and jumped in and got the submission with the cloverleaf in 352. Really, this was the only good match of the entire show. They announced Roddy Piper suffered nerve damage in the face in the Havoc post-match to explain why he won't be on TV for the next few weeks. David Finlay pinned David Taylor with a tombstone piledriver in 259. Finlay is a great worker within his element since he's really solid but not flashy. He's not the kind of guy that'll get over in this country doing 3-minute matches. Bischoff did an interview saying the entire NWO, including Hogan and Nash, would be at Nitro next week and that he'd have a surprise announcement. He really ran down Vince McMahon and the USA Network for trying to steal the thunder of Escape from Devil's Island and programming the Survivors flashback on the same night, and in a shoot crowd about the ratings, saying that if it beat a 4.0, which it did, that they promised to make a series out of it. Actually, in trade journals they were already advertising that they were filming 23 episodes of the show, called Shadow Warriors, starring Hogan and Carl Weathers, and trying to sell the show overseas. Yuji Nagata beat Psicosis with the Nagata Lock in 350. After the match, Sonny Wanu put a 100 peso bill on Psicosis as severance pay. Mike Tenay explained what an insult that was because it's only worth $13. Then Larry Zbyszko ruined the entire angle, saying that you could live in Mexico City for 2 years on $13. Raven did another interview. One inside rib was talking about sitting next to Teresa Hayes in the 3rd row at school. That's the real name of Beulah McGillicuddy. Perry Saturn won the TV title from Disco Inferno in 638 with a form of an armbar submission. Saturn was told not to do any high flying. His knee is clearly not 100% and his offense consisted of suplexes and submissions with no playing to the crowd. It didn't come off as a copy of Taz's ECW people had been talking all week about, but it was totally different than how Saturn used to work. Match wasn't good. Scott Hall came out wearing a tag title. I guess the angle is that Hall and Nash are going to proclaim themselves as the real tag champs since they never lost the titles and bought themselves belts. Hall then lost to Chris Jericho clean in 2:41 of a good surprise finish, and then beat him up after the match. Seems like we just saw that angle with Hector Garza. Larry Zbyszko made the save and challenged Hall to a match, but of course Hall didn't accept. Mike Tenay did his final lucha feature, explaining the names and illustrating 10 or 11 of the more prevalent moves of lucha libre. Now there's no excuse for announcers not to know what those moves are. This was an excellent feature. They did a lucha battle royal which went nowhere for a few minutes until the Giant came out and destroyed everyone. Ric Flair beat Alex Wright with the figure 4 in 7:44 of a decent match. Ray Traylor pinned Steve McMichael in 4:44 of a really bad match. McMichael was distracted by Bill Goldberg for the finish, although it came off really bad. Steiners beat Public Enemy in a street fight when Scott pinned Grunge outside the ring in 5:35. Grunge went through 2 tables when Rick moved, or at least was supposed to move, as he nearly lost his ear not getting out of there in time. Finally, Kurt Hennig beat Lex Luger via DQ in 10:26 when Flair attacked Hennig. Luger was mad at Flair for costing him his U.S. title match, and the two had words as the show went off the air. November 3rd ratings saw Nitro do a 3.92 rating, 4.28 first hour, 3.68 seconds hour, and 5.73 share for a show without Hogan, Savage, Piper, Sting or Nash to Raw's 2.63 rating, 2.53 first hour, 2.73 seconds hour, and 3.96 share. The Nitro replay did a 1.57 rating and 3.28 share. It was the typical pattern, with Nitro peaking from 8:45 to 9 p.m. before Raw and football started with Disco vs. Saturn and a Flair interview. Raw showed small growth, 2.5 to 2.7, when Nitro went off the air even though it was Los Boricuas vs. Badass and Road Dogg, and peaked at 2.9 for Michaels vs. Shamrock. In the head-to-head segments, WCW drew a 3.68 to WWF's 2.57. For October 28, Escape from Devil's Island from 8 to 10 p.m. drew a 4.2 rating, from 10 p.m. to midnight the replay drew a 2.5 rating, and from midnight to 2 a.m. another replay did a 1.1 rating. No doubt the hype from the previous night regarding the Hogan/Sting contract signing led to the gap between that and the USA Network counter-programming that night. The WWF Survivor Series flashback from 8 to 9 p.m. did a 2.8 rating, and from 11 p.m. to midnight the replay did a 1.1 rating. House shows over the week saw the Saturday night tapings on October 28 in San Bernardino, California draw a sellout 2,539 paying $35,554. A house show on November 1st in Salem, Virginia drew a sellout 4,939 paying $86,745, and November 2nd in Norfolk, Virginia drew 7,057 paying $129,595. Flair vs. Hennig worked on top in both of the house shows. Eric Bischoff had a meeting in San Diego with Armando Espinoza, who promotes WWO Lucha Libre shows in California, about trying to get a WCW show on Telemundo, a Spanish-language TV network in the U.S., for eventual quarterly Lucha Libre pay-per-view shows similar to When Worlds Collide in 1994, and also promoting Lucha Libre shows under the WCW banner in strong Latin markets in the U.S. It's kind of funny that there was so much heat over the wrestlers working for Espinoza because supposedly of the fear of injury working outlaw shows, but at the same time Bischoff was negotiating to lease the wrestlers to work those same shows. All of the Mexican wrestlers signed 2-year contracts this week, and were all drug tested. Given the nature and climate of the industry this week, you can probably read into that, with the exception of Mysterio Jr., who is still negotiating a new price. Not sure exactly what the deal is regarding them working in Mexico. They are all definitely not allowed to work indie dates in the US. It appears WCW doesn't want Conor or Mysterio Jr. to work Mexico at all, but that may not be finalized, and they may be interested in working maybe 2 television tapings per month just to keep their names on top in the market. My belief is the others are all able to continue working in Mexico provided WCW gets first priority on the dates and that WCW gets a commission on their Mexican bookings. Ghetto was supposed to work first with Mysterio Jr. and later with Lizmark Jr. on the October 27 Nitro. The Mysterio Jr. match was changed when they realized that they had flown Malenko in from Florida and he wasn't booked on any of the 3 West Coast shows, so they put him in with Mysterio Jr. Ghetto vs. Lizmark was then scheduled but cancelled, as the show went on due to the Zbyszko vs. Hall segment on that show running long. A correction from last week, Ghetto's real name is Kiri Takayama and not Akiyama. Ghetto beat Psychosis at the Saturday night tapings. Marcus Bagwell is expected out for another 3 to 5 weeks after he had his meniscus removed from his knee. Bill Goldberg is out of action suffering a groin pull over the weekend, although he did a run-in at Nitro. The results of the MRI on Six's neck were pretty bad as he had more damage than originally thought. He'll be out of action for a while, Diamond Dallas Page reportedly had blood in his urine, but he didn't miss any matches. Kimberly also knocked heads with another Nitro girl doing a routine that was badly timed in San Diego, but she was also back on November 3rd. Other weekend numbers saw main event at 1.3, Saturday night at 2.3 and pro at 1.4. Southern California indie Christopher Daniels should be getting a look-see. John Noor and Barry Darsow worked the Saturday night tapings as a tag team. To show just how ridiculous the treatment of the Mexican wrestlers has become, at the Saturday night tapings, Hector Garza had to put over Kendall Windham. House shows this coming weekend in both Kansas City and Springfield, Missouri are already sold out, and the advances for Nitros in Buffalo, more than 10,000 tickets sold, and Cincinnati are through the roof. WCW will book 3 dome shows in the early part of next year for Nitros. The Alamo Dome in San Antonio, Georgia Dome in Atlanta, and Superdome in New Orleans, although all will be scaled for basketball arena seating, 20,000 range, as opposed to opening up the full dome like New Japan does. The first group off MLL wrestlers, likely being Atlantis, Emilio Charles Jr. and Dr. Wagner Jr. are expected to debut on November 10th in Memphis. Lots of rumors about Scotty Riggs eventually joining Raven's Nest. The Atlanta Journal-Constitution reported this week that the WWF's federal lawsuit against WCW was thrown out of court, but that was incorrect. The actual story is WCW had filed a suit against WWF for using the term Canadian Stampede for its July pay-per-view being too close to WCW's Spring Stampede. The issue was settled out of court for no money, but with a proviso that WWF wouldn't use the name Canadian Stampede in the future. Through an internet letter, Diamond Dallas Page was able to raise about $1,000 for the family of Brian Pillman. WWF. The latest on Steve Austin is that he's working but doing very little. For example, in a dark match in Hershey on November 3rd, he was in an 8-man tag and only tagged in once. He's going to wrestle Owen Hart at Survivor Series, and work mainly in tags and gimmick matches in November, but it'll be very limited in what he actually does. The word he's been getting from specialists hasn't been positive, but it has to be hard to give it up when one is at the peak of his career and on top of the profession. It's going to be interesting to see how long on television they do these gimmicks where they tease he's going to wrestle but he never actually does wrestle. Raw is Talk on November 3rd in Hershey, Pennsylvania drew a sellout 5,661 fans paying a city record $106,904 gate. The new deal is that Jim Ross and Jim Cornette announced the first hour, and they switched to the Ross, Vince McMahon, Jerry Lawler trio for hour number 2. There was no Cornette editorial simply because the show was booked with so many interviews, but not as a sign they are dropping the feature. Show opened with Austin interview, and Ahmed Johnson came out to challenge him and Austin accepted for later in the show. Aguila, Mr. Aguila, debuted in the light heavyweight tournament pinning Super Loco, Super Crazy aka Hysteria, in 5'11". Aguila was really green when it came to transitions because he's so inexperienced, but he may be in time the best high flyer ever. His acrobatics were off the charts to the point people were blown away. Basically some missed spots and some incredible spots, including a space flying tiger drop by Loco, a moonsault from the top rope to the floor by Aguila and a tope con hilo the likes of which have never been seen in this country before. The rest of the tournament was announced with Devon Storm vs. Taka Michinoku on November 10th in Ottawa. ONT and the rest of the first round will be Eric Shelley vs. Jerry Lynn and Brian Christopher vs. Flash Flanagan. Obviously the semis will be Taka vs. Aguila and Christopher vs. Lynn, and the final is just as obvious. Overall, the tournament after all the waiting has to be considered a disappointment with only one true international star. Expect the WWF to sign Aguila and probably Pantera as well to a contract. Goldust and Marlena did an interview with an about-face, as it was Goldust who said he didn't love Marlena anymore, was walking out of the marriage and had found someone else. The original plan was for Goldust to be the sympathetic character, but I guess since Pillman was such a part of the deal, they went in the other direction. After hyping the segment as Marlena talking about her 30 days with Pillman's name, after lots of heat during the week about using that name to draw ratings again, was never even mentioned in the angle. The acting in this segment was just awful. Johnson came out for his match with Austin, but instead Kane came out and destroyed Johnson with 2 tombstones. Mankind then bent a steel rod on Kane's face, who sold it like he was shot, but then sat up like Undertaker. Austin came out and laughed about Johnson getting beaten up, saying he'd have given him a worse beating. The nod came out, followed by the load, and in the brawl, Austin gave Kama the stunner and left. Michaels and Helmsley did an interview. Fans chanted Shawn is gay, so he kissed Triple H on the lips. He went to kiss Chyna, but she didn't seem to like the audible. Michaels wanted to say he was God, as a spoof on Hogan's interview from last week, But Triple H covered his mouth as a tease of not letting him say it and saying to be God you have to be as old as God, and talked about the age in the cage match. Slaughter came out, and they put on helmets with windshield wipers on them. Slaughter ordered Michaels to wrestle Shamrock later in the show. In the latest antagonist, they showed a Mad Mero going into Sable's dressing room when she didn't have her top on yet and dragging her out, with her hands basically covering up her boobs. Mero beat Savio Vega with a low blow and the Diamond Cutter, called TKO, at 2:32. Michael Cole tried to interview Sable, but Mero drug her away mad while she was trying to wave to the fans. I guess there's no such thing as a good relationship in this profession. Vader beat Bulldog in a dog collar match in 3:35, dragging him around, and then Team Canada attacked Vader until Steve Blackman as a fan made the save. Team Canada began stomping Blackman until Vader covered him up to protect him. Billy Gunn and Jesse Jams beat Jose Estrada Jr. and Jesus Castillo in 5:22 of a bad match. Finale saw Shamrock beat Michaels via DQ and Rude, and Triple H interfered after the ref missed Michaels tapping out from an ankle lock, so the idea is that Shamrock has made both Hart and Michaels tap out in successive weeks as a way to elevate him to the top level. It was a good match, except Michaels was calling spots so loud you could actually pick them up on TV, and there were two badly mistimed spots, one of which Michaels was almost laughing about. After the match, Triple H gave Shamrock a pedigree on the briefcase. Golda suffered a broken hand in 3 places in an October 31 match with Neidhart, but will be working this weekend. On television they are going to blame it on him punching the wall after the angle in the studio. Patriots doctor recommended that he retire because his tricep tears appear to be a chronic problem. Current feeling is that he'll undergo surgery and be out 3 to 6 months. Danny Hodge, as part of the Legends segment from Tulsa, was introduced by Jim Ross as the greatest wrestler this country has ever produced, which isn't far from the truth. Probably any listing of the best American wrestler ever would start with the names Dan Gable, Danny Hodge, and Bruce Baumgartner, and maybe Robin Reed. Wrestling Observer Newsletter. P.O. Box 1228, Campbell, California 950091228.